Thanks, Jim. How's everybody doing? Good. I'm a little tired myself. I had a vacation in Flint, Michigan. That's where my wife's from. And on my way in yesterday, my flight was canceled at the last minute. And they told me the next flight available was in Detroit, which is about an hour's drive. And so I got to Detroit, got a flight. As the plane was boarding, there was lightning, so they closed all the doors, and we had to wait till the lightning was over. So an hour and a half later, I got on my flight. Well, I didn't have a flight direct. I had a flight to Savannah, Georgia, and then from Savannah, I picked up a car and drove up here. So basically what that teaches me is that, you know, the airline, no matter how well it intends to get you to places, there's certain things you can't control. Same thing when you move that up to the cloud. There's certain things that you trust the providers to do, but there's other things that you have to control yourself. So, like Jim said, my name is Jose Morales. I'm a technical trainer at SafeNet Assured Technologies. And SafeNet Assured Technologies is a data protection company. We provide solutions to the federal government. If you have a SIPRNet token, it more than likely has SafeNet AT on the back. We make that product. But for 30 years, over 30 years, we've been working, our focus has been protecting data for the federal government. My previous life, I was a soldier. I was actually here at Fort Gordon at one time, teaching at Dixon Hall and Cobb Hall as an instructor for the 25 Bravos. And it was a very enlightening experience, and it helped me transition to the job now as a trainer for our company. My first duty station, though, was in Korea, and it was at the AMI, right? It was in 201st Signal Company in Seoul. It's no longer there, but it was an automated multimedia exchange. And at that time, we had huge tape drives in the room and these huge printers, and the messages would come into our data center, and they'd print out all these copies to whatever office, and we had to QC the messages manually, then call people up and tell them to come pick up their messages. And when they got their messages, we verified their ID and made sure they were who they said they were and handed them the messages and make sure they signed for them. We've come a long way from then. Right? Now a computer can do everything we used to do in that big facility. But the things are still in check. You still have to make sure that the messages that are coming are from who you say they're from. You still have to do checks and validate that the people receiving them are allowed to receive those messages. So that's what we'll talk about today, moving it, transitioning from what we do in data centers up into the cloud. And how do you protect that data now that it's off-site and offloaded to a cloud service provider? We'll talk about the unique threats that are in place as we move to the cloud. And we'll talk about the shared responsibility model that cloud service providers have. We'll talk about a different number of cloud environments as well and how you can protect your data by different means. So protecting most data in the cloud, you want to make sure you have solutions that are trusted for the U.S. government, and you want to make sure that they are developed, manufactured, supported, and these by trusted personnel. You want to make sure that the solutions that you have are protected holistically. So you want to be able to move the same technology and the same policies and measures you have to protect your data, not just from a data center, but also to the edge, tactical edge, and also to the cloud. You want to have the same kind of features and functions in all areas. And you want to make sure that you have things in place to protect, authentication, to make sure you have digital signatures, protecting the keys, managing the keys, no matter where they reside. So the cloud evolution is here. This is really not new. We've been doing this for a while. We've had a lot of people that have moved to the cloud already and people that are deciding what to do. One of the scariest things that our customers have seen is that your data's out there, and when you move it to the cloud, and there's a good reason to do it for cost effectiveness, low overhead, reliability is very good by service providers, but they always tell you that you still have to have responsibility for what is out in the cloud, what you push out there. The providers will tell you that. As an example, commercial clouds stood up in government in specific regions, and there are GovCloud initiatives still out there. FedRAMP stats, there's 150 plus CSPs. 100 plus agencies that have cloud information in the cloud, and 130 million of cost avoidance because they can move their data to the cloud and use those resources. Of course, everything that has moved to the cloud has to be approved. It has to be a validated, FedRAMP approved product so you can start using the clouds. So with the clouds, there's some new risk. You need to think about at least a different twist on like historical risk. Here's some simple questions you can ask. We'll talk about it through this walkthrough. I'll start at the top with how do we centralize data across all environments? So how do we make sure that the data that we have is controlled and protected? Can we protect sensitive data stored in wherever, whether it be a mobile device, a server, or in the cloud? Can you do protection for data in all those environments? How do we prevent the cloud administrators and other tenants from accessing your sensitive data? Because when your data goes up in the cloud, that data is up there, and even though they have trusted, approved solutions, there's always someone, an administrator, that can have access to that. They may not need access to read the data that's up there, that's your data, but they may need to do administrative functions, right, to move the data from one server to another, from another location, to do redundancy, do all these checks. So you have to make sure that your data is protected and how you prevent the administrators from the cloud service providers from accessing the data that resides there. How do you protect the data when it actually leaves your facility to move into the cloud? Because you have it protected in your environment when you push it up to the cloud, how do you protect your data as it's transitioning up into the cloud? How do you maintain compliance in the cloud environment? So there's always mandates for clouds and cloud environments, and you have to be in compliance. It's always about making sure you check those boxes and auditing, and reviews are in place, and there's checks for that as well. So how do you maintain your compliance, and then how do you ensure that data is securely decommissioned from the cloud? So once that data is no longer required, and that the cloud service provider replicates that data across different servers and everything, how do you ensure that your data, when it's destroyed and no longer used, how do you ensure that that data is no longer usable and that those cloud service providers can't access that data? And the last one on the top left is who owns your encryption keys? So with cloud solutions, protecting your data is really one of the solutions is encryption. When you encrypt the data, there's a certain key. It generates a key, so that key opens up the data so it can be accessible and read. So you need to know where those keys are. Those are the keys to your castle, right? If people have those keys, then they have access to all your data. If they have access to your data without the keys, then they have no information at all. It's all protected. So how do you protect your data depends on how sensitive the data is. So the first step to knowing what you need to protect is you select different levels of clouds with different certifications, layer data for whatever data you need to protect. So there's classified information that has more strict measures than unclassified. The pictures of your cat may not need encryption. I don't know how much you love your cat or how much you value those photos, but it's probably not as big of a security requirement to protect that data. So who has access to your data? Similar to before you started, the people started using cloud service providers, there's many people that can actually touch the data, but the vector is a little bit different when there's a cloud service provider in place. It's a new environment, so it's actually a new threat is open when there's a cloud service provider in place. You can't have malicious insiders or outsiders, foreign government, sponsored government, hackers. An administrator can inadvertently or advertently access your data, and then a third-party contractor as well. They may not intentionally, or they may intentionally take your data and do something with it. So there's a hybrid approach that's required for customers when using cloud services. Based on what we discussed, decide whether to keep or slowly transition your data to the cloud. So when you have sensitive data on premise and you need to move it to the cloud, will it be encrypted before it's sent? Will it be encrypted while it's there? Will you do both? And that's what we have to decide, and we have to decide as the customers, you have to decide what kind of solution best works for you when you're moving to the cloud. So AWS came up with this shared responsibility model, and all the cloud service providers are kind of in line in the same way. And what it means basically is that they'll have the infrastructure in place. They'll make sure that everything that you do as far as a service to access your data, to perform analytics and do anything else with your data is constantly available. But the protection of your data, that's your responsibility as a customer, even if it resides in their environment. So what are some ways you can protect your data? One approach is through encryption and key management. So like I said before, once the data is encrypted and you have keys, those keys become the key to your castle, and those keys become very vital. So you need to have a key management system in place to control those keys, of who has access to them, audit controls and logging, and everything in place to make sure that the data is accessed by who you want it to be accessed to. So what that means essentially is that the customers have to own those keys and not the cloud providers. So you can have a bunch of services in place, but you still have to have ownership of those keys and not rely on the providers. Similar to my flight, I had to get here. United couldn't get me here. I had to go to a different provider. Delta got me a flight. But in the end, I could only go to Savannah, and I had to drive up here. So it's my responsibility to come up here and present this wonderful presentation to you guys, just like it's your responsibility to make sure your data is protected. So here's some best practices for cloud security. You're responsible for encrypting your own data. You need to own the number of ways to do this, including play nice with native and cloud solutions and encryption solutions as well. So you need to own the generation and administration of your keys. So when keys are generated, they should be controlled by the customer themselves. They should not have, the cloud service provider should not have their hands in that bit. The key management and the key generation, destruction, and everything else should be a customer's responsibility. So customers need cloud-independent security solutions that can be applied hybrid, public, and multi-cloud environments. So if you pick a solution with a cloud service provider for key management, what happens if you need to use a different service provider, a cloud service provider? What happens if you use multiple cloud service providers from the get-go? Is your key management in place? Does it play well with both environments? If you have a key management in one cloud service provider's environment and you need to move it, is it possible? Is it not? Does that cloud service provider have control of your keys? That's things to consider. You want to make sure that the key management solution you pick is something that can be transitioned not just in the cloud, but also in the enterprise level and also at the tactical edge. So here's some core elements of data security. I'll go through the wheel, and I'll start with cloud storage encryption, protecting sensitive data before it actually goes to the cloud. So you have data that goes through an encryption process, and it sends it to the cloud, and then you maintain those keys. Virtual machine encryption, because it's not only documents and everything, it's also appliances, virtual appliances that can be put in the cloud that you use with services. You want to make sure that those appliances aren't accessible to the cloud service providers as far as being able to boot up and access that data or copy those VMs and use them in a different environment. File level encryption, that's pretty basic. It could be down as granular to a single file folder. shared folders as well, shares. And you want to make sure you have an encryption solution in place, whether it's in the enterprise level or in the cloud. Application encryption is something that some of the app developers do. They want to protect their code, and as they're developing the application, they want to make sure that that code is encrypted as on the fly. So that way that's data in use being encrypted as the application is being generated. Database encryption, we use this a lot. We see this a lot with our customers in the medical or in a payment industry where they have sensitive information, whether it be credit card numbers, personal identifiable information, and they have them in these databases. Some employees still need to access some information. They may need to know your name and address, but they don't need to know your security number or what kind of illnesses you have or what your credit card number is. So with database encryption, you can choose what columns you want to encrypt and who has access to those columns and who doesn't. So that's the database encryption. And then network encryption itself is encrypting data from one site to another, whether it be data from your location to the cloud or data to another enterprise backup facility or a redundant site. So how does this morph into a hybrid environment? Here's an example. So you put everything in the cloud that you need as far as file encryption, application encryption, database, cloud storage, virtual encryption. You can have the key manager on site, and then you can have a hardware root of trust, what a lot of people know them as hardware security modules, as a separate appliance, but stores the master key. And so the master key is distributed to the key manager. The key manager generates the keys for everybody else, but without that master key, it can't be decrypted. So no matter how many keys that the key manager creates, manages, destroys, they can't be accessed unless they have access to that hardware root of trust. This is a hybrid solution that some of our customers have used before, as providing an external key manager, which is a hardware appliance, and also an external hardware root of trust. And then they have appliances as well that can do network encryption to protect the data while it's in motion, while it's in transit. So what if you're all in? What if you want to do total cloud security and you want to move everything into the cloud? You want to use your key manager. There's some cloud providers that have key managers available to protect all these features and functions, whether it be data in motion, the virtual appliances and file encryption database. You can still do that. You can use a virtual key manager, but you still need to control the keys in some way, and the way you do that is have that hardware root of trust on site. You want to have that on-prem, and you want to ensure that you always have control of that. The keys to your castle are always on your site. So that way you can use the full functionality and features of the cloud, still not have to manage and maintain another appliance with a key manager, and still have that robust encryption in the cloud, but still have that security in place and have that protection from that hardware root of trust inside your facility itself. So as you know, there's a couple of, quite a few of cloud service providers out there, and they have services and provided for all your needs. And what happens when you have to have multiple clouds, when you use multiple clouds in place, you have to make sure that your key management system and your hardware root of trust system works in all environments, plays well everywhere. You can't just use a service in, say Azure, and when you decide that you need to move to a Google Cloud or Amazon or even Oracle or whatever cloud service provider, that your encryption is not going to work anymore, that those keys aren't able to be exported and imported into a new cloud service. So here's some considerations for evaluating cloud security itself. So what compliance and regulatory mandates do you need to adhere? So cloud service providers should already be approved. Don't forget your responsibilities, please. The FedRAMP, there's FIPS, FISMA, HIPAA mandates, NIST 853. You have to make sure that you can preserve that separation of duty and provide FIPS validated secure key management and storage. And you have to maintain comprehensive auditing and logging in place as well. That's all part of the compliance. Do you have a multi-cloud environment? If you have a multi-cloud environment, does your protection solution work in all your methods of deployments? Not just cloud solutions, but also data that still resides in your enterprise or in tactical edges as well. So you need to be able to eliminate a vendor lock-in and make sure that your key management and cloud protection is not reliable on just one specific vendor that you have to rely on in order to protect those different applications on where your data is stored. And you need to make sure you can centrally manage all those keys that are in multi-cloud deployments. We have some customers that have multiple, sometimes 3 cloud service providers with the same amount of data in each for redundancy. They want to make sure that they can have access to their data no matter what. If there's an outage with a cloud service provider, they can just move on to the next one or the next one. And some have it in triple redundancy in place for that reason. But what they don't rely on the cloud service providers to do is to make sure that that encrypted data is accessible. So you want to make sure that the keys can transition across all platforms. So it shouldn't be a separate key for each cloud environment. It should be one key that transitions across all the cloud service providers that once they do the replication and copying, your key manager can access those files and give the data down to the person who needs it. So the complexity of this can be pretty tasking if you don't have the correct key manager in place. Once you start moving different types of applications, whether it be files, virtual machines, databases, applications, and then you have them in all different types of cloud service providers, and you also have enterprise core data and stuff in the tactical edge. It can be complex to manage all those keys, so you want to make sure that you have a key management system in place that is comprehensible and that's easy to use. And you want to make sure that to decide, do you want a hardware key manager, or do you want to use a virtual machine key manager and then have a hardware root of trust on site as well? So that's how you do. And then also the growth. The growth is the last thing. You want to make sure you leave room for growth. Can your key management solutions scale as your needs for data scales? Data usage keeps increasing, and our motto has always been to encrypt everything. If you have a doubt, just encrypt it, and we'll sort everything out. But you want to make sure you can protect that data that's in the cloud environment. So you want complete control over your data. And I know I zipped through this pretty quick. It's the end of the day, and you guys are been through a lot, just like I have with my trips and everything. But it's very important. This is not something that we take lightly in the business as far as protecting your keys and making sure that your information stays protected no matter where it resides. So, do I have any questions? Sir?
So it's one thing to have your machines in a cloud environment. You're controlling hypervisor above, you're doing the encryption. It's another thing to use cloud-provided data solutions. You want to talk about the different approaches to managing keys?
Sure. So, that's a nice ringtone. When you have your own appliance in place, you can select the FIPS Level. That's a nice ringtone. So, that's awesome. It's okay. So on-premise stuff is a lot easier to know what you have, right? There's another thing that we talk about a lot is supply chain. So the supply chain of a product can be quickly looked at. You have a FIPS certified appliance that has all the tamper measurements in place, and you can actually see it, touch it, and control it itself. That's on-prem. When you go to the cloud and use one of their machines, it's all virtual, right? So if people think of supply chain and they think of just the hardware appliances, but you really have to consider the data, the software appliances too, because that still needs some kind of supply chain. Is the code developed in the U.S. For that appliance, that virtual appliance? Is there measuring, are there tracking methods to say this code has not been modified and it doesn't have phone home features to phone home to foreign governments? So the depending on what you use will depend on what your mandate is. A lot of people have a mandate of FIPS 140-2 Level 3 certification, which means it needs to be a hardware appliance that has been approved and has the right crypto algorithms, but also has the right tamper measures put in place. So if somebody opens the appliance, it completely erases all the data and it becomes unusable. So depending on what your environment is required, some of our customers will use virtual key management system, but they always have that hardware security module, hardware root of trust in place. Some don't feel comfortable putting their key managers up in the cloud, so they'll have two hardware appliances, one for the key management that's FIPS 140-2 Level 3 certified, and also the hardware security module that stores that hardware seed key, the seed key for the key manager.
Please keep the questions coming, and if I'm going to need to talk a little longer, they've got to go the whole 60 minutes to get credit.
Okay.
Need to continue on.
Okay. Go ahead, sir.
So my question is, we're talking about technology, and technology keeps going and going and going, and it's always going to be improving. We're always going to have it available at our fingertips. What do you propose, or what do you recommend to get to the human issue? And so I ask this question because you say customer, I assume you mean customer at DoD level or Army level. I'm wondering if that goes all the way down to the end user level, because right now, with or without a cloud solution, one of the key things that I take away from the slide presentation is the customer owns the data. It's they must keep accountability of it and make sure, confidentiality, integrity, and all that. Like, it's their responsibility for that data. And if the data goes away, it's also their responsibility. I can't even do that at any level on a human scope. Is there
Right.
anything or any way to address that versus the technology solution? Because the technology solution can always be fixed,
Right.
but the human solution can't.
You're correct, sir. But what you can do, you have to trust somebody as far as the human solution goes. But what you can do as well is you can control access to the keys once the data is encrypted. So you can only give access to those certain people that you trust, those humans that need access to that data. So access control is another important thing. So is destruction, right? So when you destroy your data and you have this information out in the cloud still, how do you get rid of that? You can't ensure that everything's been destroyed, but you can delete the key, and you can make sure that key's never able to be accessed again, and people don't have access to the data. So they need to, the access control measures are in place, just like we have access to environments. When you log into an unclassified network or a secure network, you have different ways to authenticate to them. You have the CAT card, or you have a SIPR token, and when you log in, you don't have access to the entire network. You have access only to what you're authorized to look at. So that's the same way it would go with the keys, giving access control only to those people that need that data. Does that answer your question, sir?
So would you say that maybe the shift is, and I'm not trying to put words in my mouth, but maybe the shift is actually like being able to get the understanding that the customer's what is
goes to the key manager says, well, he's been assigned this group, so he's allowed to unlock this amount of data and access these areas. So it should be transparent to the customer.
Yeah. You're correct. If you're managing it correctly, it should be transparent to the customer, and they won't be able to see the data that they can access, and they'll be able to access the data automatically. The other measures you can put in place is you can do M of N controls on the appliances. So it takes more than one administrator to assign privileges to the users to access that data as well. So you can make, and then once those changes are made by 2 people, 3 people, 5 people, we have some customers who have 8 people that have to log in order to make a change on the key management side. Once that's in place, it logs everything. Your key management system will log everything and tells you these administrators agree that these people need access to these keys. So there's many measures you can put in place, but in the end, really, it becomes to making sure that the user experience is fairly easy, and they don't need to worry about the security as much as the security administrators have to, and making sure that everything that's done is logged and audited and able to be audited and controlled.
And another thing I've seen too is lack of coordination between the data owner and the key manager. So if there's no coordination, hey, this person should no longer have access to this, or I need access, or whatever the change is, sometimes there's a lag or no notification of a change. So, sometimes we do really well with setting it up, right, with the permissions, but once that is no longer needed, we're not as good about cleaning up after that and removing that.
Yeah, that's very true. Once you have the keys itself as well, you have to make sure your keys are accessible. So are you going to rely on just one appliance? Probably not. You're going to have multiple appliances that are clustered together that are replicating each other across multiple, networks to ensure that key access is available just as much as your data is available. Sir?
Yeah, so I think I probably asked a full question, but let me push you in the right direction because I really need your thinking on this.
Okay.
So you're talking about appliances, but we're also talking about cloud.
Mm-hmm.
So in essence, I think we're talking about certified services and the use of those in the context that they were intended for, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if let's say cloud provider X has a set of these certified appliances that have gone through the rigor of assessment, right? And then as we contract to those services, we know that we're using them appropriately. And that certification language would include key management, our liability on the key management front in order to maintain that certification that we can use for that level of data.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Close.
Yeah. So, when we move out to the cloud, and there are some solutions, key management solutions, that have been approved by the government that are virtual appliances. But it's still, no matter if you decide virtual, hardware, whatever you want to use, the cloud service providers, even though they have that service in place, it's still your responsibility to control that data. Sir?
So, just to kind of follow up with this knowledge, maybe mistaken, but reading some of this documentation on cloud, any machine or application or virtual server that you build in the cloud still falls within the distance big guidelines. And it's either going to be, so if I decide I want to build application A or a contractor comes in with a DoD or Army approved application, it's still either going to get a full-blown RMF process, given it an ATO, or it's going to get an assess only. So it's still going to have some RMF backing to say this is an approved application for DoD.
So there would be 2 approvals, underlying services.
And the cloud service providers
Yeah,
that
that's a
grant
one-time.
verification.
Yes, exactly.
So we've seen multiple clouds. Is anyone using multiple cloud solutions yet, or is it just sir?
Oh, yeah,
3. Okay.
You said 3.
2. Yeah. Yeah. So we're seeing a shift more and more in that. But the big thing we're seeing, especially, is people are concerned. Just like I was a ComSec custodian for years, in the Army, and we used to have paper tape. I don't know who remembers paper tape, KOI 18s and Kick 13s, and we used to have this paper tape, and we used to have to, get inventory, pick it up, validate that all the stuff was in there, look at the keys, inventory it, put it in the safe, sign. 2 people had to sign and verify, yes, we have this ComSec key. And anytime we opened up the safe, it doesn't matter if we looked in it, we had to re-inventory everything in all the drawers to make sure that those keys are safe. Right? We don't do that anymore. Right? Now we have key management infrastructures in place for ComSec where it just gets delivered to an appliance. But there's still those measures in place where 2 people have to sign destruction, 2 people have to sign, if they're assigning keys to an external appliance, it has to be modified and verified. It's just a shift in how we do things. It's still the same thing, same measures to protect data that we've done all the time. But now it's just a shift into the cloud world. And make no mistake that these services that I talked about, whether it's protecting databases, application files, or anything else, you're not going to rely on one vendor to do that. You're going to have different providers, different vendors. You don't want vendor lock-in to be responsible for providing all your services and doing encryption. So every vendor will have some way to do encryption for their products, either whether it's virtual or hardware. The key is to have a key manager that can still manage all those keys, no matter what kind of vendor you're using in the cloud environment or in your core environment. Sir?
So I've yet to see kind of like a practical example of how classified data is being processed or stored on the cloud. Is there a vendor here or a customer, somebody that would be able to provide that, like a good example on what that actually looks like?
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't tell you. I know we have some people that are storing classified information and a lot of Intel customers, and the facilities are controlled by, secured facilities with guards, and they have U.S. citizens working in the cloud infrastructure. Because you can say cloud, but it's not, it's not what you see in the sky. It's still servers somewhere that's storing the information, and it depends on how well that information is protected when you use cloud service providers for classified networks. So it's not only the virtual solutions, but also the physical solution in place where they have facilities in place, more than one in the U.S. and overseas that are protecting this data. So, sir?
So, I think a much more common use case is PI. Okay. I mean, if you look at where our personal information, health and otherwise, is stored, there's way more of that than any classified information you can imagine. And I think that the same general approach is applied to any data type. If you want to a better opportunity to find somebody that solves that particular question, think health information, think individual identifiable, because there's way more of those kind of folks out there. I mean, I deal in health information. That's classified as like a peanut compared to health information. Health information is vast. They have new names for the size of the data.
That's true. The health industry is one of our biggest customers. But you see on the news all the time that there's been data breaches. You see Target, Home Depot, Equifax, OPM, all these data breaches. You don't hear about the ones. About 8 years ago, Zappos, they sell shoes and everything. They had a huge data breach. All this information was accessed of these customers, but they had encryption in place. So it never made the news because the people that stole all the data, all they had were names and addresses. They didn't have any kind of other information that was, critical for their customers. So they protected their customers. So you don't hear when encryption works. You only hear when people take data and that data is not protected correctly. for developing applications in the cloud. There's certain controls you can have in place that will make sure that as the application is being developed, that it's not in the clear ever. So you can have products in place that will protect that data as it's created. So it's basically, it's really a live data encryption method. So whatever you're doing to create an app to be, compatible and to work with, say, a certain database or another application to link them together, you can write the code and you can create the application and still have encryption in place as it's being developed. And before it's released, you can also have it signed, digitally signed and approved, so that when someone receives that approved application, they know it's validated and that it's not a malicious application. So we do this a lot with FIPS certification, firmware updates on products. When firmware updates get released, they have to go through the FIPS product to get approved as well. Once they get approved, they have a signature. And once they're when you try to load a firmware on a machine, it'll check and make sure that that signature is validated and that it's approved by FIPS. So, any other questions? I got, okay.
Well, to her point, though, OWASP is a good reference for secure coding practices.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Sir, you had a question?
Yeah, we talked about blockchain earlier. So is there any current use of blockchain or future considerations for cloud security?
So with blockchain, there's it's all the same no matter where you use it in the cloud or in a physical location. It's about having a good cryptographic infrastructure built in place. So no matter if you have it on-prem or in the cloud, you have to have a good cryptographic infrastructure that can control and protect the data as it's being built, as it's transitioned. So having a strong infrastructure in place is the most important thing for your blockchain. Yeah, I don't know. Is anybody using blockchain? I haven't seen a lot of people have a need. You got everything you use. Okay. Okay. We've seen a lot of interest in it, but I haven't seen a lot of customers wanting to implement it or have a use for it as of yet. Sir?
How do you get around the physical aspect of it? Like when you went back, you talked about, like, say, the cloud provider is responsible for the infrastructure, and then later on you said kind of questions like what regulations or things they have to be responsible for. Well, being the U.S. and talking about classified data, that triggers like, okay, if you're not within the bounds of the United States, probably the continental United States, we probably don't want to be hosting anything on any cloud that the physical infrastructure resides outside of the United States, and or what the physical infrastructure consists of, because we're very wary of that. So how much information do you keep as a cloud provider? And just as I know this presentation is kind of general,
Right.
but so that you can massage our fears of, like, okay, you're not using any Huawei stuff or anybody on the other trucks. How do
Yeah.
you know that from point to point and kind of your cloud-based areas?
Yeah, so that's a good question. There are some incentives out there for DoD. They won't let even service providers use foreign products on their networks. So if you're going to provide a service to the federal government, as a service provider, you can't have any of that information touching the data that you're providing for the government. So there's mandates in place for that. I touched on supply chain a little as well. The vendors will come and see you all the time, and they may have an American name, but they may be owned by the French, and the products may be developed in France and then transitioned over and stamped, sold by a U.S. arm, right? So those measures have to be in place when you buy appliance and software, firmware, virtual appliances, to make sure that you're dealing with a customer who's been approved by the federal government to operate on these networks.
So it's FedRAMP, right? So you're going to use FedRAMP services that are certified to the level you require, right? And you're going to put that in your RFP, so they can't sell your services using that level.
Yeah, but how do you, I was asking for an example of like, how do you, to what degree of information do you, us collectively, require to know from you, cloud service provider, in order to understand what needs to happen? So it's like, what's one thing to put in your write-up? It's another thing to say, okay, show me the documentation and then prove to me. Okay, then you make it forward.
It's a daunting process to get FedRAMP certified, right? Taking years. You don't want to have to redo that. That's the whole point, right? So, I was just speaking with the gentleman a few minutes before this started, and this whole new DoD initiative with maturity levels, I think that will bring better certainty to the RFP creation process, because the people that create the RFPs will themselves be certified, right? And there has to be a level of trust that, the services you're contracting to testing to being FedRAMP level XYZ on effect that and remain that. And then the GSA is the one I believe is doing oversight of that, right? So they're doing the continuous monitoring. Mom and pop cloud services, not
Yeah, there are FedRAMP solutions that have been in place and they've been certified already, like he was mentioning, and millions and millions of dollars are saved by using a solution that's already in place and that's been approved. Your due diligence would be to find a solution that's already been approved for use to provide the security for your network.
It's actually less of a technical issue, it's contractual issue. You want to get your KOs involved, and when you start looking at the SLAs and the agreements with the cloud service providers, you start getting able to pull that information out from that.
My concern is I generally see, it's not a topic here, but like I generally see a divergence between industry, which is more like monetary risk, versus government or military, which is more like, okay, what is the risk for classified information?
So you can actually start looking at putting monetary damages against those and putting those into your contracts. In our industry, I'll tell you now, if you put in monetary damages, that starts to get paid attention to when you start worrying about it from that perspective. And I see contracts now where they're actually starting to look at those.
But the warfighter has a time constraint to get something properly vetted from you. So what is that time delay between these two entities? And he's not going to let you on my network until you can properly vet it. So and for you to give him those assurance, there's a time element there involved. How do you reduce that? Because he could be in a time-sensitive environment where he needs something to attack the adversary and get the information, so he can get into something you may have heard of, that term, OODA. It's an old term, but it's a good term. Now, how do I get at that decision-making process of my adversary and disrupt it? And what you have might be what he needs to do that, but there's a time element. I'm not going to launch your software until it's been properly vetted on a military environment.
The other thing too is that when we use a cloud service, such as Amazon, such as Microsoft, they do get audited. So if they're failing in their audit to do what they say they're doing in their contract, they can get into a lot of trouble for that.
Define a lot of them.
Small.
Do they lose the contract on the spot?
Sometimes.
These are questions. It's a good right answer. The other question I was going to
Yeah, so the processing will depend on how fast you need it, right? If you use a virtual appliance, it's not as reliable as far as performance. It just can't be because of resources that it's required. If you use a hardware appliance, you know what the performance is going to be because it's a hardware appliance and it's dedicated to do crypto operations. So really the cost becomes, it's cheaper to have a virtual appliance, but the keys may not be issued, destroyed, or be able to execute things as fast as a hardware appliance. So you have to take that into consideration when it comes to as far as cost of ownership for the product.
Yeah, not just monetary, but actually cost of like time. Okay.
Yeah.
All these things.
Yeah.
So big data, the virtual machines can't keep up. I mean, there's too many CPUs, there's too much memory consumption. So, all of that is hardware. It's dedicated hardware capacity. And there is a cost, absolutely. One of the tricks, as you alluded to, actually, you didn't actually say it. So to say it, it's to say, as the data is coming in, it's encrypted. It remains encrypted at all times. So you don't actually, you don't incur the cost of encrypting or decrypting in bulk. You incur it as access. And as access, it's not that bad, right?
It depends. I'm just asking for a order of magnitude. What additional overhead costs? Like, okay, if you didn't encrypt it, here's the cost. If you did encrypt it, here's the cost. If you didn't encrypt this portion, here's the cost. Like, what is that? I mean,
So we actually did an experiment with data in transit encryption. 3% was the hit. It was a 3% increase
just for data
in transit.
in transit.
Yeah, I don't know how to test it.
I'm just like, I saw 7 different levels of encryption. That tells me that there's 7 different things that need to be decrypted. And then it's installed in the cloud, and the cloud has to do the processing, encryption, decryption.
No, you only pick one of them. I don't think you can pick all of them.
Yeah, but you look at an industry that has had data breached and they did not provide protection. Think of everybody who has a clearance knows that when OPM was breached, you got protection, and now you get those emails saying, "Hey, somebody looked at your credit," and everything else. They had to pay for that. They had to pay for that service for the people whose data they were responsible for. If the data was encrypted and it was breached, that measure would not have been in place. So the cost of encryption far outweighs the cost of not encrypting it. I can't give you a number. Before I was a technical trainer, I was a sales engineer. Yeah.
Protection for me would last, 3-5 years. I would die in 3 to 5 years, but they have my information that doesn't change. Awesome.
Okay.
There's a session for anybody can come on Friday, where they're going to talk in OSCs, but then sometimes the rules, and I know what they are for industry to be certified before they can report to the government. So I don't know what those are. I'll find out on Friday, but it should be an interesting session.
Yeah, there's one thing I want to mention too about encrypting your information. The technology to do data creation, data movement, and everything has been phenomenal. And people have been, creating bandwidths, 100 gig, 400 gig in transit, and being able to move data, store data, terabytes, and all kinds of data storage that have been increasing and everything else. What really hasn't changed much is how we do encryption itself. Right? How do we do encryption? AES 256 is a strong encryption that's been approved by the government, but the government's actually looking at quantum encryption. When quantum computers come out and they can break every cryptographic key that we have in place in seconds, what do you do then, right? So you have to consider the products that are in place now. Are they crypto agile? Are they able to be modified and to accept quantum key, quantum random number generation, quantum key algorithms to do that encryption in place once quantum computers are available? So that's something to consider as well. Do you have a future-proof encryption solution in place?
Okay, thank you, Jose.
Thank you. Appreciate it, guys.